as we sit here currently on June 15th, 2026, the Jaguars have roughly about $9 million in cap space. Could they potentially make some cuts to order to create some cap space? Maybe try to, increase their budgets for upcoming years. We're going to be discussing some cut candidates after mandatory minicamp for the Jacksonville Jaguars that James Gladstone and company can make. This episode of Jags Now is presented by our wonderful friends over at PrizePicks. Make sure you use code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, make sure you use that code HMA. And guys, before we get started with today's episode, I just have to give you guys a round of applause. This huge milestone that we just hit of 3,000 subscribers, it's literally all because of you guys. And I want to continue to try to grow this community here at Jags Now into your number one stop shop for all things Jacksonville Jaguars. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We are on the road to 4,000 subscribers. It's crazy enough to say that out loud. Can we get there by the start of the 2026 NFL season? Without any further ado, let's talk some cut candidates. And this first guy, we've talked about numerous points during the offseason, but now more than ever, fans are really questioning, will Arik Armstead be on the Jaguars roster for this upcoming year? And it's not to say that he wasn't productive last year for Jacksonville. And ironically, in terms of your interior defensive line, he was the most productive. Had 7 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, 8 quarterback hits, 48 pressures, which is not his most, craziest year in terms of statistical probability, but he was somebody that the Jaguars heavily leaned on for interior pressure, which severely lacked last year. And you might be sitting there saying, well, Cullen, if you cut Arik Armstead, who's next in line to potentially take his starting spot? And the Jaguars, just for the record, did make this trade for Ruka from the Atlanta Falcons, trading Mason Smith to Atlanta. And I'm not trying to sit here and say Ruka is ready to take that leap and become a starter, especially in the short amount of time that you've had him in your locker room. But when you're thinking about Arik Armstead and the financials of it, if you want to create more cap space, let's say if the Jaguars wanted to make a bold trade and acquire more talent, he is somebody that, without a doubt, now that it's after June 1st, would save you the most in terms of cap savings. He would save you, as you can see at the bottom of your screen, $14.5 million towards your cap hit for 2026. So I'm not sure if the Jaguars necessarily want to move on from Arik Armstead at this point. If it would have happened, I felt like it would have happened closer to right after that June 1st date. But given all accounts, and maybe you just want to kind of bring Ruka on and Matt Dickerson on in terms of, developing that defensive tackle spot, I do think that the Jaguars are probably going to be more hesitant to look to try to move on from Arik Armstead, but that cap number doesn't lie in the fact that the Jaguars still could look to move on from the veteran. So it'll be an interesting conversation. I want to throw it to you guys. Should he stay or should he go? Should the Jaguars cut Arik Armstead? Type C for cut or type K for keep? I want to hear you guys' opinion down below in the comments section. Moving on to cut candidate number 2, and it is Foye Oluokun, the veteran linebacker. And I can already hear the comments saying, Cullen, why in the world would the Jaguars even consider cutting Foye Oluokun? Well, we're going to talk about it here in just a moment. But first, I would not be able to do this show and, this episode of Jags Now if it wasn't for our wonderful friends over at SeatGeek. Today's show is made possible by SeatGeek. Use code CHAT10 to get 10% off your next set of tickets. MLB is in full swing. The World Cup is here, and you can get tickets to all different types of sporting events on SeatGeek. The NFL schedule is officially released, and SeatGeek is the best place to go if you want to get tickets to a Jaguars game this year. Now, personally, I will not be in attendance for any Jaguars games, as I will be here in the Dallas Chat Sports studios covering the games for Chat Sports. But if you guys want to see the Jacksonville Jaguars play in person, make sure you use our friends over at SeatGeek. The Jaguars take on both the Eagles and Texans overseas in London. So even if you're an international fan, you can still watch the Jaguars play. But to kick off this Jacksonville season, the Jaguars take on the Browns at home, and you get tickets with SeatGeek for as low as $179. Whether it's a ball game, concert, or any other event, SeatGeek is the place to go as they have your back when purchasing tickets. Each ticket is rated on a scale from 1 to 10, so you know you're getting a good deal. Look for the green dots as they mean good, red means bad. Use code CHAT10 for 10% off your next set of tickets at SeatGeek. That's 10% off of any tickets with promo code CHAT10. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. Thank you, SeatGeek, for being a sponsor of today's show. And I know you guys are sitting there saying, Cullen, why on earth would the Jacksonville Jaguars cut Foye Oluokun? I mean, you can see his stats on screen. He was very productive last year in Anthony Campanelli's defense. He's a veteran that's a trusted linebacker in this defense for 2026. And on top of the fact, the Jaguars already moved on from a linebacker in Devin Lloyd, in which they didn't try to match the offer that the Carolina Panthers signed him to this past free agency. And I would sit there and I'll get into the more of the details financially of why this could make sense. But the real question that the Jaguars should ask themselves in terms of, hey, could we look to move on from Foye Oluokun is really none other than the guy that is on your screen currently right now. And that's Jack Kaiser, the former 4th-round pick. Would he be ready to step into a role next to Ventrell Miller and really be the potential green dot in the defense for Anthony Campanelli? And I'm not saying that Jack Kaiser is or isn't ready. That's a lot to ask from the former 4th-rounder who, I'm sure he's talented. I'm sure he's really picking up things, and I've heard some good things coming out of mandatory minicamp. That's just a really big stretch for me. And again, you're sitting there saying, well, then why would you cut Foye Oluokun? Well, again, it comes down to the money. And again, I don't know if the money situation is that dire this far past June 1st for the Jacksonville Jaguars, but just to put it out there, the Jaguars would save in terms of their cap savings $10.3 million if they decided to move on from Foye Oluokun. And I think it's more than likely they move on from the linebacker from Yale next offseason whenever he turns 31, as again, he's going to get another year older and maybe they feel more comfortable with where Jack Kaiser is as a developmental talent. But I just think it's very early on. I think out of this entire list, him and this next guy that we're going to talk about, they're the least likely candidates to get cut if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars. Moving on to number 3, and it is none other than DaVon Hamilton, defensive tackle who spent his entire career, with the Jacksonville Jaguars, including this last year. When you look at this Jaguars defensive line, DaVon Hamilton, he has been your rock-solid nose tackle next to Arik Armstead, alongside Travon Walker, you just extended, and Josh Hines-Allen. Albert Regis, you did draft in the 3rd round, so naturally Jaguars fans are kind of sitting there wondering, would the Jaguars look to move on from DaVon Hamilton? And I think he's been a really steady force his entire time in Duval County. I mean, he's not going to have the biggest wow stats that are just going to blow you off the screen, but he is somebody that's a great run defender, great culture guy, and somebody that if you're trying to build a defense in terms of toughness, you want DaVon Hamilton on your football team. And in terms of the cap savings and the overall numbers, you save about $8.4 million, so it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that you would move on for DaVon Hamilton. That being said, it would have to take a pretty great training camp and preseason from Albert Regis for the Jaguars, in my opinion, to even consider moving on from DaVon Hamilton. So for that reason, I still think that they're going to look to keep their kind of defensive tackle duo in Arik Armstead and DaVon Hamilton, but it is something worth noting when it comes to the numbers. Moving on to cut candidate number 4. And this one, I'd be shocked if he makes the 2026 roster, and that is none other than Hunter Long, the tight end who formerly played for the Los Angeles Rams. He's bounced around in the NFL, and when he was brought in last year in Liam Cohen's kind of version of the offense for the Jacksonville Jaguars, there just wasn't a lot of production. In 9 games played, only had 12 receptions, 85 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, about 7.1 yards per catch. Like, they were looking at him as a potential, 1B or number 2 at least to Brenton Strange's number 1A or just number 1, and he never was quite that for Jacksonville. And you couple that with the fact of lack of production, the fact that he's not great in run blocking, and the fact that you've added 2 tight ends in the draft this past April in Nate Boerkircher and Turner Koziol, who, based on all reports, and again, I know it's OTAs, they've been studs so far. Like, Nate Boerkircher is going to be that blocking tight end that does all the dirty work with receiving upside that you hope to develop one day. And Tanner Koziol, I'm telling you right now, is going to be a legitimate threat in the red zone if the Jaguars choose to use him that way. But with Hunter Long, you really don't save that much in cap savings. That being said, you also have Quentin Morris as well that I think is ahead of him on the tight end depth chart. I just don't see a world where he's on this team for 2026. Now, maybe I'm wrong and there's some kind of value that I'm just not aware of when it comes to Liam Cohen and Hunter Long and that connection, but to me, it's just the Jaguars went in and dressed the tight end position during the draft for a reason. I don't see Hunter Long being in the Jaguars' kind of plans for the foreseeable future. We will get into more in the final cut candidate and the reason why I think this guy could be on the chopping block for the Jacksonville Jaguars here in just a moment, but we would not be able to do this show if it wasn't for our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks. Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. The big soccer tournament is here. Baseball is well underway, along with a ton of other sports that you can cash in with on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 sports picks app and is the best place to win cash while watching sports. The app is really easy to use. Just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. You guys can even follow me on the app to see all of my lineups at CullenBro21. And I've got a little season-long football lineup that I think you guys could be interested in. A little $20 to win 60 here. Emeka Buka, he's going to get some targets this season. And I think he's going to produce the former first rounder. Give me the more on his receiving yards. And then Bashal Tutin. No more Travis Etienne. I think he is going to get the lion's share of the workload. I have him more on his rushing yards for this upcoming season. Again, $20 lineup to win $60. New user offer. Download the PrizePicks app today with the link in the comments and the description and use code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code HMA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. All right. The final cut candidate for the Jacksonville Jaguars is Ezra Cleveland, who, I'll be honest, I wouldn't necessarily love this idea if the Jaguars did move on from Ezra Cleveland. That being said, there's a lot of dots that can be connected that could lead to Ezra Cleveland not being on Jacksonville's roster for this upcoming season. Where last year in his first season in Liam Cohen's offense in this Jacksonville regime, I thought he played well. Had a really good overall grade. Pass blocking I thought was really solid. They gave up 4 sacks and had 3 penalties, but I thought in general he was a guy that Jacksonville could lean on during their kind of turmoil on the offensive line last season, and he was one of the few bright spots that I thought was a consistent part of their offensive line last season. But then you get into the offseason moves that the Jaguars have made, and more specifically at that guard position, because in that third round, they drafted Emmanuel Pregnon, who I think it's more likely he will compete for Patrick McCarry's job at right guard, but you still have Wyatt Milam, who you drafted on day 2 in the previous draft back in 2025. There is a lot of competition, not to mention that Walker Little has that guard flexibility to compete for one of those starting guard spots. I wouldn't consider him a major contender compared to Ezra Cleveland, but if the Jaguars are sitting there content with Emmanuel Pregnon or Wyatt Milam or one of those other guys maybe taking his position, they restructured both Robert Hainsey and Patrick McCarry. Those guys are locked in terms of this upcoming year, in my opinion, for Jacksonville. Ezra Cleveland, on the other hand, his future is a little more bleak, and he did not get a restructure, which means the Jaguars could look to cut and move on from Ezra Cleveland and save $9.2 million with only $2.2 million in dead money. Now, I'm not just, a guy that says cut a player just for the sake of cutting a player and creating cap space, but it does leave you wondering, okay, why did they not restructure Ezra Cleveland, and why did they not lock him in if they, were more committed to him long term? I think this is going to be a low-key interesting storyline. Again, personally, I wouldn't do it, but if Emmanuel Pregnon or maybe somebody else really steps up and challenges Ezra Cleveland this kind of training camp period, look for him to potentially be on his way out of Jacksonville for 2026. These are the 5 cut candidates that I have post-mandatory minicamp. Again, you guys let me know if I missed anybody down in the comment section. Arik Armstead, Foye Oluokun, DaVon Hamilton, Hunter Long, and Ezra Cleveland. That'll conclude this episode of Jags Now, presented by PrizePicks. Again, use code HMA to get $50 in lineups whenever you play your first $5 lineup. And until the next episode, guys, take care, enjoy your week, and we'll see you on the next one.